Hello everyone, and welcome to game number 15 of the 1960 World Chess Championship match between Mikhail Tal and Mikhail Botvinnik. Now, as you've seen my previous 14 games in my previous 14 videos, if you haven't, there will be a link in the description below where you can check all of them out. Tal is currently in the lead by 2 points. It's 8-6 in Tal's favor, and Tal needs 12.5 points to actually win the match and become the world champion. But as you see, there is a nice score by Alexander Alekhine above the board. There are many chess players who can play very well to win, but masters can draw at will. Even though, Alekhine was a great player, Tal didn't agree with him all the way. Tal didn't actually think he can actually draw all the games, as it's 8-6. He would need like five drawn games in a row to actually become world champion. So he still felt, both him and Koblenz, that he needed to create something. So he did deviate from e4 in the previous couple of games, but he decided to return to e4. So in this game, again, Tal has the white pieces, and he opens with e4. Botvinnik once again c6. We have the Caro-Kann defense once again, as Tal so far didn't really manage to get any advantage with white against the Caro-Kann. d4. d5, knight to c3, d captures on e4, knight captures on e4, bishop to f5, knight to g3. So the classical variation, this has been played in all of the games, bishop to g6, and in all of the previous games Tal continued with knight to e2, with the idea of going knight to f4 and then pushing h4, h5 and so on. Here Tal decided to go bishop to c4. Bishop to c4, with the idea that he wants to leave this as an option. He doesn't want to commit with h4 immediately. So Botvinnik decided to play e6, and only now did he play knight to e2. And here he is basically inviting Botvinnik for a very sharp variation, which starts with knight to f6. But Botvinnik doesn't want to go for this, as he didn't expect Tal now to play e4 and to go for this line, so he plays bishop to d6. Bishop to d6 avoids complications, but now Black is forced to give up his dark square bishop. And this is, these are small nuances, but a dark square bishop is a very important defending piece in the Caro-Kann, especially in this variation. So now Tal pushes h4. The threat is of course h5. We have h6, and now knight to f4. And now bishop must capture knight. If you go bishop to h7, then you get knight g to h5, and then there's the threat of knight captures on g7. Black would have to defend with king to f8, and this would be a pretty big deal for white to achieve a position like this. So after knight to f4, bishop captures, and now knight to f6. Here Tal played queen to d2. Queen to d2 was a move that was a bit more quiet than Tal would enjoy, but the problem is that the sharp h5 that leads to a pawn sacrifice after bishop to h7 and queen to e2, where he offers the d4 pawn with ideas of going bishop to e5, castling in the future queenside, was already played by Geller in his game against Bagirov, but Tal was pretty sure that Botvinnik knew of this game. So instead, he went for the queen d2 move, for the time defending the d4 pawn. Knight to d7, now comes queenside castle, and now knight to d5. And here rook d to e1. Tal doesn't mind giving up his dark square bishop for improving the position of his queen. We have knight to b6, bishop to b3, and now knight captures on f4. a5 was also an option for Black to kind of start his own expansion on the queen side, but Tal says that here he would simply continue a3, and on a4 bishop to a2, and again Black didn't really achieve anything here. If this knight would ever capture this bishop, then the knight on b6 could become a weak piece. So after bishop to b3, knight captures, queen captures, and now knight to d5. Here, of course, a5 was no longer an option, because now white has bishop captures on e6, and black will either admit that this was a silly idea and castle, run away. Of course, if he captures the bishop, then after rook captures, there's nowhere for the king to go. King d7, rook d6, this wins the queen and the game. So after queen to f4, now, as I said, a5 is no longer an idea. Knight to d5, attacking the queen. Queen to e5, an excellent square for the queen, threatening that g7 pawn. We have castles, and now knight to e4. Knight to e4 with the idea that Tal knows Botvinnik is going to play queen to b8, try to exchange queens. He wants to block this with knight to d6. Another thing is, if Botvinnik would capture this, then this would be an excellent exchange. This light square bishop is an excellent defender. And another thing is, he did decide that, okay, he did consider f4. f4 seemed like an idea, preparing to push f5. But after rook to e8, there's really no point now in pushing f5, and now this pawn structure on the king side looks pretty weird. Now f5 is simply met with bishop captures. Knight captures, pawn captures. Now you can play queen captures on f5, and after the exchange here, black can even play queen captures on h4. You threaten the rook here, your up pawn is black, and it's a better position for black. So after considering all of this, knight to e4. Queen to b8, now Botvinnik offers a trade of queens, and here knight to d6. Tal doesn't mind trading queens, as the title of the video suggests, but he wants to trade queens on his own terms. If he trades queens, he wants to play knight to c4 and then capture with the knight on e5. So he wants this e5 square for his knight. And he says that if Botvinnik tries to stop this with b5, not allowing knight to c4, then Tal gets an excellent attack with h5. Kicking away the bishop, bishop to h7, and then rook to h3, and now it would get very dangerous here, as the rook is coming to g3, the queen and rook would be pressuring g7, another excellent position for Tal. So after knight to d6, rook to d8, now attacking the knight. Here knight to c4 is planned, although instead of knight to c4, h5 was also an idea. And now, if queen captures, you have the option of playing pawn captures. And after pawn captures, queen captures here with check. Queen captures, rook captures, and it would be a better position for white. But Tal thought that he could even do better than this. But there is a very interesting line that after h5, not queen captures on d6. But it's very interesting if black plays bishop to h7. Then white has this knight captures on f7. Idea. King captures, queen captures on e6 with check, king to f8, and now rook to e3, threatening the terrible rook f3 check. So only way to prevent this is queen to f4 to pin the rook on e3. But now white has rook to h4, attacking the queen, queen captures, and now rook to f3. Queen blocks, rook captures queen, and pawn captures, and now c4. Pretty much all forced. Bishop to g8, attacking the queen, queen f5, now the knight has to move. Knight e7, queen captures with check, king moves, and now d5. It's, black does have two rooks, a knight and the bishop against the queen and the bishop, but white will capture the h6 pawn, so this h pawn will be quite dangerous. And here after captures and bishop to a4, check, black will have to give up at least the exchange, so after captures, and c5, it's a very delicate position where white definitely has chances due to the passed h pawn. He will grab the h6 pawn, and then he will start pushing pawns on the king side. But as Botvinnik, of course, would not play bishop to h7, there was no need to even consider doing things like this. So knight to c4, offering a trade, and first knight to b6. Botvinnik doesn't want to trade queens immediately. If he captures, then Tal doesn't have to capture with the knight. He can even capture with the pawn and strengthen his grasp of the d6 square. Instead of this, knight to b6. Queen captures on b8, rook a captures on b8, and now knight to e5. Bishop finally goes to h7, rook to h3, and now Tal says that he doesn't really need the queen to start attacking here. He can sacrifice the d4 pawn. If Botvinnik captures it, then comes knight captures on f7, king captures, and now bishop captures on e6 with check. King has to move to e7, and now bishop to f5 wins back the piece. King moves, bishop captures, Tal would be up a piece, and with pawns on both sides of the board, he has a bishop against a knight. He was very confident in being able to win this position. So after rook to h3, Botvinnik doesn't dare to touch the d4 pawn. He plays knight to d7, and here c3 by Tal. Knight to d7 is an excellent defensive move against the variation knight captures on f7, because now it doesn't work. Because after king captures and bishop captures on e6 check, in the previous variation the king could go to d7, maybe d8, but he'd have to go to the d file. Here he can go to the f file, king to f8, and now rook to f3 doesn't work as in the previous variation where the king would have to go back. Now the knight can simply block knight to f6, white is down a piece and black is winning. So, like I said, instead of this, c3, simply defending this pawn. Knight captures on e5, rook captures on e5, and now b6. We have rook to e3, rook to c8, we have bishop to c4, rook to c7, b4 now, king to f8, g4. Now Tal starts pushing on the king side, as he did kind of immobilize the queen side. Bishop to g8, Botvinnik doesn't really have a move here. The idea of g4 is also setting up a very deadly trap for Botvinnik. Here Tal was hoping that Botvinnik would play f6 in hopes of rook captures and then bishop to g8, kind of winning winning the exchange, as the rook can't move, the bishop on c4 is undefended. But there is a problem. After this f6 move, there is rook to f3 by Tal, and now black is in a whole lot of trouble. He can't capture, and white has all the time in the world to capture the e6 pawn. You can't move the king. If you go here or here, sorry, here or here, the rook will capture with check. If you go here, then the bishop will capture. If you play anything else, if you don't move it, then it's pinned. If you defend with the bishop or with the rook, you can always just capture the e6 pawn. No troubles there. So after g4, Botvinnik doesn't fall for it, bishop to g8, now comes bishop to b3, bishop back to h7, again Botvinnik doesn't really have a move, f4, bishop back to g8 by Botvinnik, king to b2, bishop back to h7, again Botvinnik really doesn't have a move, and basically he's just waiting for Tal to make a rash decision, and Tal did start improving the position of his king and everything, and here he plays h5. He says h5 might have been the best move chess-wise, but it might not have been the best move, you know, in any sporting sense. Better yet, you know, it's better not to make any decisions. Better maybe to bring this bishop over to the king side where it will be useful. For example, on g2, maybe expand further on the queen side. You know, set everything right, and only then decide any structure changing move. But okay, he played h5, and now we have rook d to c8. Bishop to c2, preparing his maneuver with the bishop. Bishop back to g8, and here Tal was very pleased by Botvinnik's bishop to g8 move, as both Botvinnik and Tal were convinced that if there is an exchange of bishops, that the rook endgame would be winning for Tal. So g5, f6 now, rook to e4, c5, and finally Botvinnik was able to push c5. Bishop to b3, attacking the e6 pawn, and now c captures on b4. This bishop to b3, in Tal's opinion, is the move that could have been made better. Probably here captures, and a3 was much needed to continue this game with an edge for white. But after c5, bishop to b3, here we had c captures on b4, we have c captures on b4, and now h captures on g5, f captures on g5, f captures on g5, and rook to g3, going for the g5 pawn. Rook to f7, rook captures on g5, now rook to f2 check, and king to h3. This is move 41, and this is where the game was adjourned. Tal made his king to a3 move, and Botvinnik Botvinnik also made a move, but it will only be discovered tomorrow what he had played. So Tal spent the entire night with Koblenz analyzing this position. Botvinnik, of course, analyzed the position as well. Tal and Koblenz thought that Botvinnik would have played bishop to f7, but as Botvinnik showed the other day, and they agreed to a draw, Botvinnik simply showed the variation that he analyzed the entire night. It was rook c7 with the move Botvinnik played. And after rook g4, doubling on the g file, now threatening to exchange rooks, as h6 was a threat. Rook captures, pawn captures, rook to f4, now bishop captures on b3. You can't capture first like an in-between move because simply bishop blocks. So king captures, and now rook to f7, defending the pawn. King moves, improving the position, both players. King c6, king to g5, attacking the rook, and after king moves f4, both Tal and Botvinnik would have nice passed pawns, but in the end it would definitely be a drawn game. So game 15 also ends in a draw. Now the result is 8.5 to 6.5 in Tal's favor, so 12.5 points is needed. We are almost at the end of this great series, so a couple of more games to go. So do stay tuned. I will probably finish this series before starting anything else. And after I finish this, I mean, we did have the candidates and the Grenke Chess Classic, so a lot of modern tournaments. I will be checking your suggestions that you've left in the comments, as I haven't visited them for quite a while, as I've been fairly busy with the current events. So yeah, that's game 15. I do hope you enjoyed it. I would like to thank Brendan Booth, Lovro Soldo, Dan Hudik, Matteo Tognella, and Loftur Amundason for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot, I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check two of my previous videos here. I will make both of them videos from this series. Once again, in the description below there is a link where you can check out all of the games from this match, and if you haven't, feel free to check out also my series about the 1959 Candidates Tournament, the tournament Tal had to win to actually get this opportunity to challenge Botvinnik for the title. So yeah, once again, check the videos here, check the links in the description. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon.